So I'm going to show you how to get the basics down for self-portrait. You're going to be using a little mirror which you're going to perch somewhere so you don't have to hold it. But I'm going to put mine down and do a generic face. So it might help to remember that a head is basically the shape of an egg, an upside down egg. So the point of the egg is your chin. Of course, people's heads vary. So some people have narrower, longer egg shapes than others. But let me just put down very lightly this egg shape now. There we are. Now imagine that down the middle you have a vertical axis dividing the face into two equal parts. And then between the top of the head and the chin, we're going to find the middle, which would be roughly here. And we're going to run a horizontal line, which is going to meet the middle one at a right angle. This middle line is the eye line. And I know people find it very hard to believe that the eyes sit halfway down the skull. But if you think about it, you do need quite a lot of space to fit your brain in. So just take it as a rule that is cast in stone. The eyes sit halfway down this egg shape. Now this width is big enough, should be big enough to fit in 5 eyes. So imagine an eye shape here, another one here, another one there, and then one last one here. So between the eyes, there's a space for a whole eye. That's the basic one to remember. We're going to focus on the second eye, this one, and this one. The others are just there to show you how the measurements work out. So moving down the face, you have this space between the eye line and the bottom of the chin, and you need to find where the tip of your nose lands. It does vary. Some people have longer noses than others, but it's sort of roughly halfway down. So let's put the tip of the nose here with a little curve. And then the question is, where do the lips part? How far down? So between this space and the chin, if you were to divide this space into 3 equal parts, that would be 3 equal parts. This one, 1/3 of the way down, is where the mouth line is. What other measurements do we need? It's useful to maybe, well, let's start with the eyes, because those often are the ones that give us problems, mainly because people think that an eye is a symmetrical fish shape like that, and then the iris sits in the middle and the pupil in the middle of that. But this is actually a symbol. It's not actually a realistic eye. So it's worth actually observing how these curves are not symmetrical necessarily, and maybe it sort of peaks further in at the top, and it comes down, and then it curves into that little pool where the tear duct is, and then comes out and round. So the top of the eyelid has a thickness. It's not one line, and you've got a second one which would indicate the thickness, and then it tapers as it meets the tear part, and the bottom lid, if you look very carefully, you'll notice that it's also got a thickness, and it almost looks like a little ledge here. You'll see what I mean when you look at yourself in the mirror. Then the iris is actually partly obscured by the top eyelid, so you can't see the whole circle there. You only see some of it. So just draw some of it. It's like an eclipse. And you've got a tiny little dot where the tears come out. And then you would go off and do the same thing on the other side. I'm just doing it a little bit faster and looser than this side. Useful also to remember that the eye is sitting in an eye socket. So there's actually a little bow of bone here. And by putting that in very lightly, it helps to structure the face, and then you know that the eyebrow is actually going to sit on top of that, right on the edge. And often there's a little line here because the skin and the flesh are sort of draped over this cavity, and that's why we get bags here. So once you've got that down, we could just move down to the nose, which is something that often people struggle with, how to do noses. And because they know that a nostril is a hole, they often end up putting two round things like that, which makes you look a little bit piggy-like. But it would be useful, again, if you imagine that the tip of your nose is actually a fleshy ball, and it's got other two fleshy balls, but overlapping, and slightly further up. And then by doing that, you are bringing out this beautiful line, which describes the nostrils, which are these sloping openings. They're not actually round when you look at them face on. How wide to make the nose? The nose is actually the same width as the space between these two tear ducts. So if you pull the line down from there, so I could actually make this a little bit wider. So this is your nose shape. You don't need to draw anything here because you are going to find your shading, and the shading is going to help you kind of describe the structure of the rest of the nose. Moving down, often there's a dip here, and the upper lip, also useful to think of it as two little circles, and that is the basic structure of the upper lip. Of course it varies, the shape varies from person to person, and then the bottom one might be useful to also imagine it as two sort of ovals sitting next to each other, which also are draped with skin and form the structure of the mouth. The middle line is very beautiful, and it often varies from person to person. The lighting plays a role. Sometimes the mouth is slightly parted, so if you just put a shadow there, very rarely can you see teeth. It might be a flash of white, but we're certainly not going to draw any teeth. And then it's useful to think of the chin as also being a fleshy ball. So once you've got these basics in, you get a feel for what's going to happen later on. Going back to the eye, as I said, the eyeball is a ball. So if you were to draw a ball, if you just stay with the outer periphery, it's a disc. But once you start adding shading in, you start to see it as a three-dimensional object. So that looks a lot more 3D. Well, the same is true for the eyeball. So often if you look at the white area and you go right up to the edge, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a shadow. And by putting it in, you get that more 3D look. Then the middle bit, the pupil, often has a little glint of light in it. And talking of shadows, often this upper lid is shading the eye, and the shadow actually falls on here. And by putting these little details in, then you start to get a more realistic look. The one thing that we haven't put in is the ears. So if you go to the eyebrow, that would be the top of your ear, and you can feel it on your own head that the bottom of the ear lands up pretty much in line with the space under your nose. So the ears are often much bigger than you think they are. Right? And then the neck, sometimes people make these very narrow little necks that look like the stem of a flower, but the neck needs to hold up this quite heavy head, and the neck attaches itself under the ears. So you would actually start going down and tapering out to meet the shoulders. And then the hair, unless you're bald, the hair sits on top of that egg shape and drapes below it. So you can have a lot of fun with the hair, because you can be quite loose with your marks and even mimic the direction that the hair grows from. So it grows from the scalp outwards. So if you follow that in your marks, then it's going to look a little bit more alive and realistic. And by drawing in a sort of quite a loose way, you manage to give the impression that you are very self-confident, and that gives the drawing an aliveness, which is very endearing. You know, when a drawing looks like it's been done with ease, then it's more appealing to look at. So I think that's kind of it. You would then go back into this and start noticing shadows. So if the light were coming from this direction, all your shadows, this part of the face, would end up being quite shaded, with a lot of variations, of course. And if the light were coming from the top, then whatever juts out, like the nose, the lips, the chin, there would be deep shadows underneath. So the shadow always falls on the opposite side from where the light is coming from. And it's really just a question, once you have that basic map, of then going in and, you know, just putting more shadows in. You don't need to draw every single hair of your eyebrow, because the eye doesn't see it in that way. You can just make it into a sort of shadowy area, and just go back and build things up slowly and find your way and get lost in it until you're happy. And that's it.